everyone, and welcome to our Hot Topic webinar today on rituals, faith and spirituality. I'm delighted to have the CEO of Meaningful Aging Australia with us today, Rachel Wass, who just is fantastic in this space, doing so much wonderful things. And thank you to everyone that elected this as a topic of interest for volunteering in palliative care and other volunteering roles across the state. So we'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of wherever we are today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Recognise anyone in this webinar or watching this later with First Nations heritage, and to acknowledge that sad news and sorry business happens on the lands and seas around us all the time, and it takes a community to look after each other. And also the Aboriginal people have a vast amount of knowledge in this area, and we're keen to learn and grow from that as well. All right, so this webinar, Rachel will be giving her presentation, and then what we'll do, if you have any questions later, please feel free to email us. If you're watching this later, also please feel free to email us at hello@palliativecaresa.org.au. Now I'd like to hand you over to Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shyla. This is just fabulous to spend this time with the group gathered here today, or those watching it afterwards. This is one of my favourite topics, and I sincerely hope that the information I share today is helpful for you doing the amazing work that you are doing. And like Shyla, I guess close to my heart is recognizing that nations have a wonderful sense of spirituality that we can kind of tap into. And for me, I'm actually in Melbourne today, and like you, probably in South Australia, you've obviously had the change of season, and so I'm saying Womanjayaka, which means welcome and coming with intention. Yeah, just the change of season for us at the moment is in the wombat season. So I can certainly say that we've got cool weather and lots of mists at the moment, which is a beautiful thing to experience. So just opening up about the topic. And firstly, I guess when we look at rituals and spirituality, I guess we want to sort of have an entree into this in just saying that death and culture, I guess, is one of those things where it's kind of a socially constructed idea, which differs, vastly across different cultures. Often the fear of dying is innate for many people, as I'm sure you know, or understand yourselves inherently. And fears and attitudes that people have towards death and dying are often sort of from perhaps their family backgrounds, their culture, the experiences that they've had in their own society. It can be learned through education, what society kind of tells us about that. It can also be language, arts, religion, and family traditions. But essentially, every culture is going to have its own coherent explanation of death, and what's believed as right in the way to manage death and dying. And there's almost as many different religious practices as there are related to death and treatment as the body as there are to religions in the world. So gosh, that's a lot. However, in having said all of that, there are a number of major faiths that have specific requirements to manage the death and dying process, different kinds of prayers, different types of, how you treat the body. Do you touch the body? Do you not touch the body? What needs to be said or not said before someone dies, or if they are actually diagnosed with a terminal or a life-limiting illness. So there's many sort of aspects, and I've just got a picture there of a guideline which might be helpful for you. It's called a multi-faith practices, and really that looks at some of the major faith traditions that are that we have in Australia, and some simple ways to kind of manage that, what kinds of things you need to be aware of. So that's one resource that you might have a consideration for. But what I want to do now is have a bit more of a consideration of the idea of the no faith kind of rituals and practices. And recently, in fact, I think it was last year, we had a series on SBS called The Last Goodbye. Not sure if you've actually heard of that, but this is the growing awareness in Australia, in our Western kind of culture, looking at the need for how we deal with death, dying, and ritualization, as well as the funeral process, and treatment of somebody after they have died. And it's from Ray Martin. I'm sure you're aware of him. He's quite a famous journalist over the years in Australia. And he was very kind of honest and open about his own kind of fear of dying, but also, thinking about the ways that he wanted to consider his burial, his wake, just the rituals around his death and dying. But kind of do that beforehand rather than ignore it. So what I wanted to do is just play a short video, and Charlotte, you might want to help me here in playing this. I'll just go to the slide. Here we go. So Charlotte, if you can play that for me, that would be fantastic. It'll just go for 2 minutes. Now I can't hear anything on my side. Perhaps that's just me.
I'm just testing it. I think there might be an issue with the sound sharing, so we might later.
Okay. Okay. Oh, look, that's okay. We can skip it. It is a fantastic series. You can see there in the video that it kind of gives Ray a bit of a forerunner of confronting the idea of death and dying. And you know, often people don't want to think about this, but of course, in the work that you're doing in this volunteering capacity, there's no getting away from that. This is something that's going to be confronting or imminent or has happened. And so what's great about that video and about that series, and it's free to watch on demand on SBS, is it goes through the contemporary sort of nature about that, and also looking across the spectrum of attitudes in Australia today, and ways of sort of dealing with death and dying that's really quite encompassing across the whole spectrum of kind of attitudes, cultures, faith and non-faith. And it's a really good one to watch. So I saw Shyla's shared that in the link. So I really encourage you to have a look at that if you're feeling comfortable to do so. Thanks, Shyla, for that. So there's one thing I think we should really consider quite early on, and that is about this idea of what is spirituality, because at the heart of, I guess, this transition of from life to death, spirituality is often an aspect that comes through because these existential questions are arising at this time. And so it's really good for us to consider, again, contemporary notions of what is spirituality. And I'm going to run through a little bit of information about that, and then we're going to get into more in depth about the concepts of ritual. So there is actually quite a lot of research about spirituality. And There is a number of definitions, but this is one that is adopted quite widely. Certainly, this is one that Meaningful Aging Australia adopts, and it's from Christina Polcheski. Um, and it says it's a dynamic and intrinsic aspect of humanity, oh gosh, through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience the relationship. And this is sort of the key point for me, I think, is it's the relationships between yourself to yourself, your emotional sense, your inner self, um, to others such as family or community or society. It's also your relationship to nature. So if we think about First Nations people and their connection to country, say, for example, as well as the significant or sacred. Now you'll see there, it doesn't actually say religion, but that's an implied aspect to the significant and sacred. It can be expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices, including religion. It is an area, I think, that's sometimes misunderstood. And even in a medical context, sometimes people might be reluctant to engage with that. But as again, in the work that you're doing and as volunteers, the benefits of engaging with these broad aspects of spirituality can be both an area that's kind of helps you in managing your day-to-day interactions, as well as someone who is going through this threshold of change and the death and dying process. So quickly, the next slide. Really, this is a a slide because often people say, what's the difference, Rachel, between religion and spirituality? And really the sense is, and this is an easy way that I explain it, is that if my spiritual connection to, say, for example, is nature, and I walk through the bush into nature, and I'm hearing sights and sounds and smells, and observing the changing vistas in front of me, and that's my connection to my emotional well-being and nature. I can do that as an individual. But if I was to, say, for example, decide that I want to join a bushwalking group, and that group has uniforms, it might have a guidebook, it might have a leader. In a sense, that's kind of where religion has a sense of that formalization process. So it doesn't mean that it's one or the other. It's a choice and an individual aspect. And what we find in the sense of, meaning of end of life, that often these notions of spirituality and religion arise, even if they weren't present previously. Or the opposite can happen. Someone who might say that they have been a religious person for much of their life may change completely and decide that they're wanting to embrace a more broader sense of spirituality. So a very quick look at those aspects of spirituality. So I'm just going to flick through. One aspect is obviously connecting to yourself. And I've got lots of pictures on the screen here, so forgive, it looks a little busy. And normally I'll step through in depth of, aspects of how someone might be observed when they're connecting with this sense and when it's disconnected. But for the purposes of today, we'll just have a quick flick through each of these. So when we're talking about connecting to ourselves, we're talking about being in touch, going within, being in touch with our sense of our state of mind. We're thinking about things like prayer. We're thinking about reflective practices like meditation or yoga, as you can see there, mantras. It's also things like journaling. You can see a picture there where there's a person looking in a mirror and reflecting back, kind of reminiscence therapy. So if you're thinking about someone who is in palliative care or towards end of life, this kind of reflection process of what can help kind of still those kind of anxieties and thoughts. And sometimes prayer or these kind of reflective practices can be really, really great, as well as music. So, certainly I can reflect back on my mother's own death and dying process. And what was really important for my mum is, in fact, she really wanted certain prayers said at regular intervals. And I certainly saw that that made a big difference for her. But we talked about that way before she was kind of not able to speak for herself. And so I think that's the key with any of these aspects. But I just want to remind you, as I'm going through each of these areas, these 5 domains of spirituality, just to think about for yourself what is also helpful to help fill your cup, and ways in which you can refresh your own sense as well of emotional well-being. Another one that I know is quite a popular one is nature, so connecting to nature. And these aspects, again, I guess I'll draw on my mum, the experience with my mum. So my mum loved roses, and she really wanted to have flowers and to be able to see outside, even when she was unable to get outside herself as her disease progressed, and she became more and more unable to get off the bed, say, for example. But nature's really all-encompassing and is one of those things that if we're able to have that conversation with someone who is in palliative care, to find opportunities in which we can kind of address that aspect of nature, because it's often that space in which that natural environment. There's lots of research talking about the benefits of being in nature. And certainly there's different expressions of that. So that can be working with others. It might be growing. It's still important to be able to sort of touch the soil and see something growing. It might be sights and sounds. It might be the awareness of the change of nature. I think I've skipped a page. I think I did. Oh, I've been talking about nature. I'll come back to others. So nature, we're talking about here those changes of seasons. It's also another way to sort of really connect with nature is thinking about places where someone has been in their past, and revisiting that, whether it's the possibility to have, I don't know, maybe an iPad or something on the TV where you can actually see or revisit special places that you've been to. Also bringing nature in. So it might be, I don't know, gum leaves, something that I love is the lemon scented gum. It's such a beautiful tree, and the smell of those leaves, if that's able to be brought in, and the feeling of the textures and the smells. I'll come back to that previous one. So apologies, I skipped over this one and was talking about nature. So this one's the connection with others, and this is a broad sense. So this is connection of nature, activities such as groups. So it might be an online community. It might be really important. Someone's, I don't know, an environment activist group, or working in a volunteer sense. So Mum was really involved in Red Cross, the volunteer, the donation stores. It's also those encompassing aspects that's specific to that person and their community. It might be their chosen family, such as in the LGBTIQ plus community. So working with others, it could be family matter, family members within a cultural sense, or the role of that person, particularly in communities such as Greek or Italian communities, the role that that person plays in their cultural group is really important. And it still remains as being something important as someone is, in a palliative sense too. So we did, so we've done connecting to ourselves, we've done connecting to others, and we've done connecting to nature. Another one that's really important is creativity. So this is really things like music, it's, painting, it's poetry, it's, reading of books or, dance. And it's also an aspect where we think about ideation, or we think about being able to navigate life. If we're lucky enough to reach any age, but I guess if I think of mum again, at 75 years, we all deserve a pat on the back for living as long as we do and being able to navigate the challenges of life. And in order to do that, we've actually had to be problem solvers. And so creativity is also about that aspect of navigating life and change. Um, but certainly, again, playing music is one of those things. We know in the death and dying process, certain faculties, our sight might go, but our hearing might remain for a little bit longer in the death and dying process. So having and understanding the types of music that might be really enriching to somebody's own sense would be really good to know about if we're able to sort of discuss that. Poetry is certainly another one which can be really consoling for both the person who is confronting death and dying, but also those that are around that person, including yourselves. Also, the last one here is something bigger. So this is really that aspect of when people think about where you can actually just put down your bags, your emotional baggage for a little while. And for me, that's when I'm near the ocean. That sense of being just a grain of sand on the beach. And you often hear it from astronauts who've been out into space, and they're looking back to this blue planet, this little blue fragile planet, and they often have this sense or experience of being sort of a part of this huge universe, and that sense of just how grateful and gratitude, and being connected to the sense of being greater. People also have experiences of this when they visit significant sites. So, again, this could be First Nations people, cultural sites and country. I certainly feel a sense of sacred when I'm, at the footsteps of Uluru, or in a great cathedral or mosque or temple. So that sense, it can be a sense of a god or a divinity or ancestors as well. So these things, again, just thinking about all of these domains in this broader sense of spirituality is also helpful, I think, when we look at ritual, which is the next part of my presentation, because spirituality is very individual to and unique to each individual person, and in fact changes, from day to day or week to week, month to month. So for you to know about these broader sense of spirituality, I think is a great thing to workshop or to understand, what aspect you might be able to meet for that person in this death and dying process. And ideally, obviously, if you're able to have a conversation, a broad conversation with someone, then these areas are great ones to look at. So now we're looking at the importance of rituals. So let's dive in and have a look at, really the definition. So rituals are increasingly popular, particularly in kind of Western societies, in a contemporary sense. Particularly with this changing nature of spirituality. And there are many rituals that are found in faith-based practices and cultural practices, prior to, at death, and after dying. And lots of those religiously inspired chanting, prayers, sacraments, body blessings, and culturally minded rituals about body placement, about body washing and body contact, particularly with the earth. And they're able to be done both in kind of the situ of whether it's an aged care or a hospital or end of life care area. Ideally, you want to kind of try and organise this in advance if there's something particularly unique that it needs to be accommodated. Examples of religious or cultural ritual support can include specific prayers, sacraments, rites, ceremonies, observances, traditions, celebrations, solemn moments, and kind of rites of passage practices. And that guideline, that book that I was showing you early on, is probably a good one to look at. Really, a ritual is something that's more or less repeatable. A sequence of actions that are kind of undertaken in a way that is, with a solemnness or a, symbolic kind of dimension to it. And I guess, again, knowing that broader sense of spirituality, if someone isn't from a particular faith or cultural group, they're going to give you some good clues as to what could be symbolic and solemn and a ritual that you could do for that person. So I think, that aspect of ritual is something that helps us through that rite of passage. So what's the impact of ritual? We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic in particular, that really sort of stopped a lot of these kind of aspects of ritual being there. And often that's also contributed, certainly if we think about those people who are doing the caring, such as carers, but also those in healthcare. It certainly is something that's contributed to what we call moral injury, because human beings certainly, they do want to be meeting that need. They do want to be present and support someone at these incredible junctures of death and dying. And we don't want to have someone die on their own or in a sterile environment. So rituals can really help us make sense of a tragedy, give meaning to death as a life stage. We do a lot of, or we certainly know what to do when someone has a birth, the stages of that kind of pregnancy and birthing scenario, and certainly through other kinds of milestones in people's lives. But of course, and I know Palliative SA has some amazing resources and tools and does incredible work in helping people understand these processes. And I guess this ritual aspect can help us make sense of this kind of process, give meaning as a life stage, help honor the person and a sense of that rite of passage. It's also a time in which we can potentially have opportunities for reconciliation and forgiveness, and to create that unique goodbye. So you can see there a couple who were able to be together before one actually passed away. So they both were very, very ill, and were able to just hold hands before passing away and talk to each other or communicate. So let's have a look, examples of ritual, and then we'll be able to have a look at questions, or certainly cover off other aspects anybody would like to cover off. So examples of ritual. Rituals can be carried out in many ways. So it can be an individual sense, a one-to-one kind of ritual. It can be in communal settings. It can be formal or informal. It could be repeated or occasional, And rituals can also be a literal or a metaphorical kind of in nature. So what do we mean by that? So individual, this could be someone like yourselves being present beside that person and saying a prayer for that person, or a poem, or being present, holding their hand. In a communal setting, we might say, a funeral would be an example of that. We think about repeated, so it could be, in some cultures, and certainly myself as a Buddhist practitioner, there is a regular time in which, after the person dies, there is a ritual or prayers that are said, and certainly, that happens so many times after the person dies. So there is a process, and significant moments. So wrapping that up, examples of ritual: 1 minute moment for carers. There's certainly formal processes in which you can kind of say goodbye that are quite generic in nature. Prayers for those who are alone, the decoration of a casket, funeral planning, a memorial garden, honor guard. That was something, certainly my mum was given, and that was something that's really remained with me as something as honored. Scattering the ashes or dealing with belongings. So that's the end of the presentation there. I really hope that that has been helpful for you. Shyla, is there any last questions or things that we should cover in this topic?
I think you wrapped it around and shared this from so many different angles and practicalities. So thank you so much. What would be one take-home message for someone in volunteering about supporting your volunteers, or if you are a volunteer, as an action point that they could do after watching this?
That is such a good question. Well, I think I would really recommend connecting to those sources of that broader sense of spirituality yourself. Because if you are able to do that, I think that's really where we can meet the needs of other people. And don't be too concerned about a ritual having to be overly formalized. I think that, if it's done with right intent in our hearts, then I think that's where it's going to meet the need. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone that's watching this and has learned about this. Amazing. Please jump onto Meaningful Aging Australia's website. They have so much information here and lots of resources to continue with, and a great newsletter as well. Thank you for your time, Rachel, and thank you for sharing everything that you have. And please be in touch in the future to anyone watching this if you have any questions. Thank you again.